France's political crisis is showing no sign of abating, with the resignation of Sébastien Lecornu as Prime Minister after just 27 days in office. It means the country is set to have an eighth Prime Minister in the space of 5 years. Deutsche Welle correspondent Arthur Sullivan joins us now from Berlin. Arthur, g'day. So why is France so politically unstable at the moment?
So this instability really all goes back to the fateful decision last summer of 2024, by the French President Emmanuel Macron to call snap parliamentary elections. Now, just a very quick explainer on the French political system. So the President and the Parliament are separate. There's an executive branch, a legislative branch, and they're elected in separate elections. And last summer, Macron got spooked by the strong performance of his rival, that's Marine Le Pen's right-wing National Front Party. They performed very well in European elections. And so in the aftermath of that, he decided to call these sudden parliamentary elections, and he cast them very clearly as a decisive vote for the French people to either give his centrist coalition a clearer mandate or to fully embrace the right. But the thing is, neither of those things happened. The election left the parliament even more divided than it was before. No bloc was strong enough to govern. And so since then, there's been this instability where you've had 4 different prime ministers. That's going to soon be 5. Budgets haven't been able to be passed. There's been disagreement over government formation. And it's really hard to make any serious legislative progress. And so, in effect, at the moment in France, chaos is reigning in its political system.
And so what's at stake for the economy and the wider EU?
Well, the thing is that this instability means that France is not in a position to deal with some pretty serious fiscal problems that it has. So France is in debt, big time, has been for quite a while. Now, culturally, it's never been well known for balancing its budget. The French government typically spends a lot more than it takes in. But under Macron, this has gotten more pronounced. So since he took office in 2017, government spending has increased dramatically, but there's also been major tax cuts. That means the budget deficit keeps getting bigger, and France now has the 3rd highest GDP to debt ratio in Europe. That's a typical measure just to see just quite how indebted a country is relative to its growth. But the problem is, a lot of the time countries that are at that position, they're working actively to try and deal with the problem. In France, this instability means it's actually getting worse. Ratings agencies are warning about the risks of being in so much debt. France's borrowing costs are going up, and there's anxiety just about how unprepared France is to deal with a potential financial crisis, because memories are still very fresh across the EU of the euro sovereign debt crisis that if we all remember, happened in countries like Greece, Portugal and so on in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. And when an economy as big as France's is in this position where there's anxiety over its debt levels, then obviously the whole EU has reason to worry about what would happen in the event of a wider financial problem or crisis.
So is there any prospect of an end to this political crisis, and is the French president himself, Emmanuel Macron's position, under threat?
Well, what's been happening for the past year is that, they've kind of stumbled on. New governments get formed, new prime ministers get named without there necessarily being fresh elections. But that doesn't really help the longer term problem. It's just a sticking plaster, and that could happen here. But the reality is that France needs a stable government capable of reforming its fiscal situation, and ideally one that works with the president and that isn't in opposition to him. But what's really happening all the while here is that this is benefiting the right-wing National Front. They're clearly leading in opinion polls, whether that's for the parliament or for the next president. And they would not work well with Macron. That goes without saying. If they ended up in the dominant position in Parliament, now they claim that they would bring stability, but they're a divisive political force, and many people across France would strongly and passionately argue that they would bring anything but stability. Of course, their supporters would argue otherwise. Now, as for Macron, his term doesn't end until May 2027, and it's unlikely that he's going to depart before that. But what's been happening amid this crisis is that politicians across the divide, obviously those from the right wing, but also including some of his allies, they say that there should be a presidential election sooner rather than later, ahead of that 2027 vote, to try and resolve this crisis. Because if Macron can't forge a stable government soon, that pressure is only going to grow, and more questions will be asked about his own position.
OK, we'll leave there. Arthur Sullivan in Berlin. The US Justice Department has indicted New York's Attorney General Letitia James on financial fraud charges.